if you're running in the Democratic primary, there's certain demographics that you're going to have to get. There's certain key, crucial demographics that are crucial to you winning not just the primary, but also the White House. African American demographic, that makes up roughly 13% of the community of our country. Hispanic community, believe it or not, makes up more. If I'm not mistaken, they make up 15%, if not more. They have been popping babies out like hotcakes. So the candidates are meeting at NALEO to give their pitch to that community. We're going to hear one Mr. Bernie Sanders give a bold immigration platform to start within the first week of taking office. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. And yes, one Mr. Bernie Sanders is at NALEO. This is National Appointed Latinos Elected Officials. I think I said that right. National Association of Latinos Elected and Appointed Officials. Telemundo is hosting this event. Bernie Sanders is giving his pitch, but he's also asked certain questions. So I want to show two parts of this. I want to show Bernie Sanders' first introductory speech, but I also want you to hear Bernie Sanders' secondary question, meaning he gives this announcement and then they ask him a question. The question that they ask him has to do with what are you going to do essentially to change the policies that Trump have enacted, and how soon will you do it? So first, I want you to hear Bernie Sanders' introduction, and two, I want you to hear his explanation of what he's going to do for office. By the way, guys, if you enjoy this content and you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting this content through PayPal or Patreon. They demonetize these videos at will. My wife likes to say even $1 helps, and that is absolutely true. Even $1 helps. Without further ado, one Mr. Bernard Sanders.
Welcome. You have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Jumped the gun already here. All right. Buenos dias, and let me thank NALEO for the enormously important work that you do in this critical and frightening moment in American history. It goes without saying that as the son of an immigrant, somebody who came to this country at the age of 17, very little education, no money, couldn't speak a word of English, I am appalled and disgusted by Trump's racism and his xenophobia. And I will, on the first day that I am President of the United States, do everything that I can to end the fear that so many people in this country are experiencing and end the damage that Trump has done to this country. Trump wants to divide us up. We will defeat Trump because we will bring our people together around an agenda that works for all people and not just the 1%. Healthcare is a human right. Education is a human right. When you work 40 hours a week, you should not live in poverty. We're going to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Bernie Sanders is going to get in office, and he's going to write legislation called Human. And we were like, wait a minute. We thought you were for Medicare for all. No. I kept saying human rights, not human rights. I'm joking at the way he's saying human. That's all. Let's keep going. I'm picking at his language. Let's keep going.
And we're going to make certain that every American has affordable housing and lives with dignity. Thank you.
Senator Sanders, over the past couple of years, the Trump administration has demonized the issue of immigration, calling for the militarization of our border and a zero-tolerance has resulted in the death of at least 7 children and countless separations of families.
Yes.
This rhetoric, fueled by fear, has created a humanitarian crisis at our border. Today, little is said about the amazing contribution of immigrants to the United States and how essential they are to the success of our nation. If you become the president, how would you make right and would you set the record straight for our community? And how soon can we see an immigration reform? And would you name many Latinos for your candidate?
We cannot, thank you for that question. We cannot have real immigration reform unless we have people from the immigration community at the table helping to work out that comprehensive immigration reform. So to answer your question, literally on the first week that we together are in office, we are going to use all of the powers of the presidency, all of the executive orders that we can, to undo the fear and the damage that this president has done. My father was an immigrant, as I said. And if Trump wants to throw out millions and millions of immigrants, which, by the way, we will never allow him to do, he would be in quite a...
I hate to point this out. Obama threw out 3 million immigrants. I don't know how many immigrants Donald Trump threw out. I don't think it hit 3 million. We stood by while Obama threw out 3 million immigrants, and nobody made a peep. I understand Trump is racist, but whether you're racist or not, isn't throwing them out still throwing them out? Let's keep going.
Shock to know what that does to the economy. I'm not quite sure that we would have food on our tables or that the price of food would not skyrocket. I'm not quite sure that the construction industry would not collapse. And I'm not quite sure that a lot of families in this country who look to immigrants to take care of their kids would no longer have that care.
Understand why he's saying that. He's not being explicit, but understand why he's saying that. Cheap labor. Capitalism depends on cheap labor. There's some jobs, there's some industries that don't work without that cheap labor. And maybe don't work is too strong. Maybe they don't work with the price structure is the way it is, meaning everything goes up in value or costs. Food goes up in cost if you have to start paying people more because immigrants no longer work those particular fields or work those particular jobs. Same thing with construction. Across the board, all of those jobs that immigrants were doing for less than what people would typically be paid go up in price. And you can even make an argument that some of those jobs wouldn't have people to fill those positions at all. Let's keep going. But let's be very clear. Some of it has to do with the work, but a lot of it has to do with this issue of cheap labor.
So what we have got to do is to understand that Trump is a demagogue, and he does what demagogues always do. And what that is to pick on a minority, and today that minority is the immigrant community, try to divide up the nation and bring people against that one community, blame that community for all of the problems that the country experiences.
Kind of like the Democrats and the Russians. Kind of like what the Democrats were doing in regards to the Russians. This notion that Hillary Clinton lose the election on her merits, the Russians somehow helped Trump in order to beat her. And from the last 3 years have screamed at the height of their lungs that it was the Russians, the Russians, the Russians. He's right about Trump to some degree, but let's also be clear that Democrats have been doing the exact same thing on the opposite side, using the Russians as the scapegoat for all of their ills. Just saying.
And again, our approach is radically different. We are going to look at the real problems facing the working families of this country: low wages, poor educational opportunity, housing that is not affordable. 500,000 people sleeping out on the street. A criminal justice system which is broken. And we're going to look at those problems, and we bring all of our people together, black and white and Latino, Native American, Asian American. And we say that we stand together to create the economy and the government that works for all of us, not just the people on top.
For the moment, think about what that means. Think about what he's saying. What does it look like when you were raised with a mom who's homeless, or raised in a household that is somewhat insecure? When I grew up living with my grandmother. My mom, like I said, wasn't necessarily, she did an exceptional job raising me, but we were always under financial pressure. And when we were living with my grandmother, all of us were kind of living at the house together. The neighbor didn't have lights. It's not that he didn't have lights in the house. He couldn't afford electricity. Many of the times I would go over, the kids would be studying by candlelight because they couldn't afford lights. What does it do to a child raised in that situation? What does it do to a child not having proper nutrition for their foods? How do they function at school? How do they grow up? What are the opportunities for that individual? How do they pay for college? And after they pay for college, what does it mean to have $50,000 of debt on their backs? That's assuming they go to college and assuming they don't get a job because they have to get a job to feed themselves afterwards. What is that life like? Why do you want somebody to experience that life? If a person works 40 hours a week, why do you want them in a house with no lights? Do you think that's fair? They're working, they're contributing to the society. If they work 40 hours a week, should they not have the ability to feed themselves and put a roof over their head and get medical access? Even if they don't work 40 hours a week, I would argue that those things should be provided. But at the very least, you can meet me halfway on that point of saying, if a person lives in a society, works in a society, they should be able to feed, clothe, roof, and live with dignity. And when they get older, still live with dignity. I agree with him 1,000%. 1,000%. This notion that somebody is working at Walmart and getting paid $10 an hour while the Waltons are making billions. I watched that was the video. That third guy making $100 million. $100 million. That's a failure of your society for somebody to come and make $100 million. I mean, $1 billion within the context of your society. There are people living on the streets. Literally people living on the streets. And there are other people with $100 billion. That's astonishingly bad. That is not something to be proud of by any stretch of the imagination. That guy should be ashamed of himself. And a society that allowed him to be that rich should be ashamed of himself. We have failed as a society, and I'm talking about worldwide, to allow something like that to take place while we still have poverty to the degree that we have it in this country, in the UK, and across the world. Do you realize that regardless of your issues, the majority, I'm not going to say the majority, a large section of the planet is living off $2 a day. Majority of the planet, $10 a day. I know it seems like when we compare wealth and poverty, we usually talk about within the context of Western nations. The world are not. The world is not akin to Western nations. I'm sorry, that sounds weird, and I'm not quite sure the subject-verb agreement, but I think you get my point on it. I'll end this here. I don't want this one to go too long. Bernie Sanders making a bold immigration commitment within the first week of his administration. And to be fair, this is not necessarily overblown. When Donald Trump got in office, Donald Trump was making one executive order after the next. Donald Trump set the precedent. One of my points when Donald Trump took office was Donald Trump is throwing out of whack what typically takes place in the restraints that are typically in that office. And the next president that gets into office is not necessarily going to let that stuff come back into whack per se. They're going to use the space that they've been provided. All presidents use the space that they were provided with the last president. You don't believe me? Look at Trump using the stuff that Obama was doing. I'll end this here. Like I said, I don't want to go too long. I have several more videos that I want to do before today is over with. So if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Sanders is being a panda bear here. He is pandering, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what he's pandering is wrong. I massively disagree with what Trump has been doing at that border. I massively disagree with the deportations that Obama was doing at that border. And so hearing somebody with a sane immigration policy, or at the very least is trying to look at and figure out what a sane immigration policy is, I like it. I like it. Thanks so.